finished up its second season, and man, what a wild ride. Let's talk about it. My name is Diamond, aka Lady Leo. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, or welcome if you are a brand new viewer. I am a lover of all things nail polish, makeup, TV shows, movies, all sorts of things. My hope is that you come to my channel, find something that you love, and hit the subscribe button because I would love to have you. Hopefully you can see some of my nail polish on display in the background. It's just a very small part of my nail polish collection. But I wanted to talk about Loki, which is currently the only show in the MCU to be granted a second season. And wow, who knew Loki would be the one to go on to have one of the best arcs for any characters in the MCU, to have such a satisfying end for a character that I wasn't fully invested in the beginning. I know a lot of people liked Loki. I didn't dislike Loki, but if you're gonna ask me like who's one of my favorite characters, I don't know if Loki, he probably wouldn't be in my top 5. But as this season went on, and definitely like in comparison, well, more of a companion piece to season 1, I do think Loki's kind of one of my top 5s now. This season just kind of comes full circle for him in so many ways. Now, due to the fact that the final episode of the show has been out for a week, this is probably going to contain spoilers. Just because it's been a full week, you know, you should be watching it episodically. But if you don't, this is your spoiler warning. There might be spoilers in here, so if you don't want to be spoiled, go back, watch the show, which is great, and it's a pretty easy binge. You could do it on the weekend, and then you can come back to my review. But make sure you come back. Okay. So essentially the show picks back up where we left Loki at the end of season 1. So if you remember, that's with Sylvie killing He Who Remains and basically breaking the sacred timeline, causing a bunch of different branch realities. So that's essentially where we pick back up with Loki, with him trying to prevent all of the realities from breaking down in the loom that's within the TVA that essentially sort of ravels raw time into the sacred timeline to prevent the loom from failing by trying to essentially increase its capacity. So that's the very like simplified version of like what's happening in this season. One of the things that I really loved about this season is how the show handles time travel. And I think they try to do it in a way that's complicated, which I appreciate because it means that I have to pay attention. Like, it kind of makes me think of Interstellar from Christopher Nolan, which is one of my favorite films by him. But Christopher Nolan is a director, like, normally when you're watching a film by him, you know, there is some element of you having to pay attention as an audience member, to be an active watcher, and to really like focus in and make sure you're paying attention. And I think when it comes to this season of Loki, that's definitely true as well, because while we were definitely dealing with the concept of time in the first season, it becomes so much more complex and complicated in this season, because I think it involves having to really rework how we understand time. Right? Because if you think about it from our vantage point, we typically perceive time to be linear, so always moving towards the future and chronological. And so to a certain extent, like if you're thinking about it like as a physical construct, we think of time as just moving forward in a straight line. But if you remove yourself from that timeline and you put yourself in a place out of time but that has its own time, I think you have to think about time as more of being like a circle and a loop that can loop back on itself. So inherently, it's kind of like a complicated thing to really think about how so many things that happen that we see in the first season, they could have happened because of what's already happened in the future. So inherently, it can be a really difficult thing to kind of wrap your mind around, and sometimes I have to go back and rewatch episodes, which I don't mind because I think the show is just really great. But in order to fully try to understand like what they're trying to say to you, but I don't mind that because I don't mind being an active viewer and participating in the experience and wanting to genuinely understand like the things that they pose, the questions that they pose to you in the show. Some of my favorite things on the show are just like the conversations that certain characters have with each other, and especially like the finale. Like, I feel like this is a series finale because I really don't know what else they would do with this version of Loki, considering like how the show left him, which I'm very, very happy with. Like, I don't really want them to do anything with Loki, but the finale for me was perfect. What I want out of a series finale is just to have a deep sense of satisfaction. And that it's kind of bittersweet in terms of what happens to Loki, but like, it still feel like for his arc as a character throughout both of these seasons, I feel very satisfied because of the journey that Loki goes on personally and where he ends up at the end of this show. So for me, like, watching the finale, there's so many great conversations that Loki has with Sylvie, with Mobius, with He Who Remains. All of those contribute to essentially the decision that he makes, which changes the TVA and his future especially. Like, he makes a huge sacrifice that involves a life of solitude for him, really, so that he can protect all of the timelines without having to only protect the sacred timeline. So I just love this journey that Loki goes on and how he gets there, and I loved watching the show. And I really loved Jonathan Majors playing up two different versions of Kang variants, and I had it all wrong. I was thinking that the Victor Timely that we see in this season he did become like the He Who Remains that we see at the end of time, which is not what happens. He's just another variant. But sometimes, like, when you're watching a show like this that deals with time travel, you start thinking, okay, so he is that He Who Remains, and he just went back to seed himself. It can get super trippy. We also have some new players in the show, most notably, let me look at his name. Most notably, Ki Hu Kwan. I hope I said his name right. I loved him. I didn't grow up with watching him as Indiana Jones. Like, I've gone back and watched all of the Indiana Jones movies. And so I don't really have like this deep connection from him from like back then, but I've seen him in a few things recently, and I really, really like him as an actor. I think he just has great energy, and he's just an incredibly likable character. And I love the character that he plays of Obi, or Boris. So he's a great addition to the show, and I feel like, Marvel, you can figure out a way to shoehorn him in somewhere. If you can find a way to bring back Lashana Lynch, who plays, what's Monica's mom's name? I don't know what her mom's first name is. Maria. I think her name is Maria. Sorry. If you can find a way to shoehorn back in Lashana Lynch, who is Maria Rambeau, in different variants, we can find space for OB as different characters, or just for like the actor Ki Hu Kwan somewhere. We can find different space for him, because I just really love him as an actor, and I would love to see him as other characters in the MCU somewhere. I feel like the only thing that I noticed is how much of a role Sylvie was reduced, and I can't decide if I like or dislike that. I mean, she's such a prominent character in the first season, and she plays such a big role, but her role gets substantially reduced in this one, and we only really get more screen time with her in like the later episodes. So in a way, I feel like it works for this season, and because I'm viewing both seasons as companion pieces, I think it's fine, both ones combined. But I do notice her absence a little bit, but I think it's necessary for Loki to be without her, especially considering the decision that he has to make. And I really like the conversation that they have in the finale too. So I noticed Sylvie was a little bit less present. I kind of wish there might have been like one episode thing. I wish there might have been like an episode solely focused on Sylvie and kind of like her thought process, because in a way I get where Sylvie's coming from, but she still doesn't see what she did as being wrong, even if it leads to the destruction of everything. So all in all, I have nothing but good things to say about this season of Loki and Loki in general. I thought this season was great, and I kind of started off like not knowing how I felt about the season, because I don't like to do season reviews. Sorry, not season reviews. I don't like to do episodic reviews. One, I don't really have to set up. I don't want to do that every night and then try to get it out every week. I don't really have that set up in my apartment. But two, I think it's hard to judge an entire season off of just seeing like an episode at a time, right? Like, you really need to watch the episodes, like think about them, maybe even go back and rewatch the season as a whole to really just kind of decide how you feel about it. Me personally, that's kind of how I feel about it. So for me, at the beginning, I wasn't sure if I was vibing with the season like after the first couple of episodes. But as we started to get into it, I was like, okay, oh, we're going there. Okay, okay. So I started to get more and more invested and more interested, and I ended up really, really loving this season. And I can understand, like, when I see comments from people on other videos that I watch when they say that they feel like Loki is saving the MCU. I get what they mean. Like, I don't think the MCU is in danger. I do think they've had a slew of not such successful stuff. That was a weird way to say that, but I think the MCU has definitely not been as successful as they thought they would have been, especially with some of their like movies that came out in theaters recently. I don't think the MCU is like to the point where it needs to be rebooted. I don't know how anybody else feels about that. It would be pretty difficult to reboot it at this point too, especially if you're talking about like recasting people. But anyway, I digress. I think that for me, when people say they feel like Loki is saving the MCU, I just think they mean that it's a really, really good show, and they wish the rest of the MCU would be this level and this quality in terms of like production and writing. And I agree with some of that. I don't think every show or every movie in the MCU for like the last few years has been bad. I think there's been some missteps, and I think sometimes like the MCU does get bogged down by trying to set up the next phase, that they can sort of do that at the detriment of the movies in particular. I think the best place to sit there and set up villains is the actual TV part of their shared universe, you know what I mean? Because you have more time and you can spend a little bit of that time setting up your next villain while still getting to know whatever characters the show is about. So for me, I think that would be my shifting focus. Like, I wouldn't spend time in my movies trying to set up the villain for the next phase. I would do that in my shows, and I would just make sure that the movies that I make are sort of good as their own, and they sort of just add to the MCU. But I don't want to get into this whole thing about where the MCU is. Are they doing good? Are they doing bad? It's very subjective. I'm still very much a fan of the MCU, and I'm not going anywhere in terms of like, I'm not leaving the MCU. So I loved Loki. Let me know, guys. I really loved Loki. I loved this season, and it's going to be bittersweet not to have Tom Hiddleston as Loki anymore. I'm assuming he's good to go. It's been like 15 years since he's been playing the character, which is such a long time. I imagine that's such an interesting thing as an actor, to have something like this where you've been playing a character across different movies or different TV shows for such a long period of time. That must be really satisfying and kind of bittersweet too, to just be like letting that character go, considering they've been a part of your life for such a long time. So maybe we'll see Tom Hiddleston as Loki somewhere in the MCU in the future as a little cameo. But if we don't, I'm really happy with Loki's arc through and through. And let me know in the comments below, did you guys love Loki? Did you have any issues with it? Just let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. You can visit me on all my socials, although I will say Instagram is the one where I'm the most active. Thank you so much for watching. It's been a pleasure. Catch you later. Bye.